My topic today is what I wish the world understood, what I wish the world knew, based on our family's experience. So you're going to hear a lot about what happened in my family and why I think it's important to tell this story, because there is a lot of bias, there's a lot of assumptions around substance use, and so I want to share kind of what our story was and how we came to this. So in 1983, my kid's dad and I moved to Chula Vista, California to do faith-based social advocacy work. We were working with heroin addicts and homeless on the streets of Chula Vista, working in what we called the barrios at that time. And believe me, there were no two less prepared or qualified to be doing this work than he and I were. We had never known anybody whose day evolved around finding drugs, consuming drugs, coming down from drugs, start all over again the next day, rinse, repeat. We knew nothing about that. As far as we knew, there was no known substance use in our family. Keyword there, as far as we knew, right? So always bear that in mind. We had never known anyone who had come to such a low point in their life that the only thing they had to sell or trade was their own body. I was yet to sit with a young mom who's crying because she can't go to work because her husband had sold the only pair of shoes she had for a fix. But all we knew was that we loved Jesus, we loved people, and somehow we had to put those two things together and we were going to change the world. And to a certain extent, I still feel that way on some days, but it's from a much different lens now. So the first time that someone kicked heroin cold turkey on my living room floor was something I will never forget. I was heartbroken by the agony that he was experiencing, both physically and emotionally. And I remember each of these experiences like it was yesterday, even though it was more than 40 years ago. I'm very young, but almost 40 years ago, and there's a lot of water that has washed under those bridges, and you're going to hear about some of that. At the time, we had two little boys, Stephen and Joel, and we added their sister Rebecca a few years later. And all of these people that we brought into our home became our friends. They became aunts and uncles and big brothers and big sisters to our kids. And they ate with us, and they slept on our floors, and they went to church with us, and even more. And when they would go away, my kids would be really sad, when they would walk out of our lives by either relapse, jail, or sometimes even death. And my kids were very attached to that, couldn't understand it. I don't know how you make kids understand that, because I still don't understand it to this day. But as much as these folks were accepted in our home, as much as they became a part of our lives, I somehow always held this idea, always had this perception that the troubles that afflicted them would never afflict my family. Somehow, despite all the evidence that was right beneath my very nose, we would never fall victim to the things that had afflicted them. So why? Our friends had families. They had mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters. Some of them even had kids who had loved them and had probably done everything in their power to try to change them. So were we just lucky, and so they were unlucky? Were we somehow just special, but they were not special enough to save? Did we do all the right things and they made all the wrong moves? I can guarantee you that was not the case, because most of the time we didn't know what we were doing. But what I have come to know, and what I wish the world understood, and why I do this particular talk, is that love is not enough. Love is not enough. Stability and security is not enough. We can't arrest our way out of this problem. Like, all of these things have a place, and all of these things are important. But love is not enough. Because if it was, 2 out of my 3 would not have become afflicted with this same disease that we don't call a disease. Because addiction is a disease. It's a family disease. It's a community disease. And it's a disease that is enabled by stigma, by ignorance, by policies that are rooted in years of bias and arrogance and intolerance. Addiction does not discriminate based on color or socioeconomic status or how much someone is loved. And it's not a disease that is isolated to the poor or the uneducated. Believe me, I know this now, but I shudder. I shudder at how deeply embedded in me those biases were. So along the way, some of the things that I learned, some of the things that I heard, some of the things that were imparted to me, and I hate to say some of the things that I even believed, sounded something like this. And I've already told you how that one is a lie, right? Or how about this one? The very definition of tough love is doing for somebody what they should or can be doing for themselves. There's a lot of gray area in there. And so when you decide with your family or with your loved one what kind of boundaries you're going to draw, and they don't line up with the same things that other people think you should be doing, what do they call you? Enabling. Raise your hand if you've ever been told you're an enabler. Yeah. Many, many, many times. When we're talking about labels, so we label family members, we label anybody who loves someone an enabler, but let's just call them criminals too. So if you use drugs, you're a criminal. So now you're labeled with that and you're put in another box. So how many times did I lay awake at night thinking, what did I do? I didn't nurse them long enough. I nursed them too long. They shouldn't have gone to nursery school when they did. I potty trained too young. Whatever, you caused this. So even though the people around you might be thinking the very thing, it really doesn't matter because you have already beaten yourself up forever about this. Or if you share with somebody, Joel's going to rehab next week, and you see that thing flit through their eyes, what is this, 4, 5, 6? If they don't have it now, they're never going to get it. It only takes once. It only takes once. Just one more time. Try one more time. And if they loved me, they'd just stop. If there was anything I could impart to you today, it's they do love you. They do love us. And they would stop if they could. So just close that one up right now. So I want to tell you a little bit about our family. Oh, addiction is a choice. This is an important one. Wipe it out of your mind right now. My little girl said to me, Mom, I don't have an off switch. I don't know how come my friends can party on the weekends and then be normal during the week. I don't have an off switch. The first time she picked up, it was a choice. After that, it was a disease. So I want to tell you a little bit about our family. I'm going to start first with my middle son, Joel. So our family was very close. So I was close with my parents, the kids were close with their grandparents and so forth. This is me and the boys and my dad, some airport somewhere. Look at that face. That face got him out of more trouble than ever. And as he got older, if any of you love someone with substance use disorder, you know how that can easily turn to manipulation and so forth. But God, look at that sweet little face. He was really good at sports. He was good at every kind of sports. If he wanted to do it, he was able to do it. And somewhere around junior high or high school, he started rollerblading and began competing. He was really, really good at it. He was good at all sports except water skiing. And that really drove him crazy because his big brother was super good at water skiing. And we would pretty much drag Joel behind the boat like an anchor. And he was just so angry. So I don't even like the water. I don't want to be in the water. Yeah, liar. Here he is with my dad, picking apples in the backyard. So in 1995, the kid's dad decided he wanted to go a different direction, and he exited our family, and he didn't have a whole lot to do with the kids from then on. This was our first picture as our new family unit. And this was also about the time that Joel began experimenting with drugs. He started with marijuana. Somewhere along the line, graduated to pills. We lived pretty close to the border, and so he and his friends would go across the border. It was pretty easy to acquire pills, bring them back. And he began his business enterprise, I guess, we could say. Joel graduated from high school when he was only 17. And I swore when he walked across the stage and got that diploma, I should have walked across the stage and gotten that diploma, because he did his best to screw up his senior year. And then in 2004, we took a family trip to Hawaii. My oldest boy proposed to our now daughter-in-law, Emmy, while we were there. And of course, Joel was always hamming things up. Joel was the life of the party right up until the time he wasn't the life of the party. And there was a lot of drama and a lot of trauma on that particular trip. So I really like this picture because it helps me remember that there were some fun times during that trip. So just a few other things to share with you. He discovered hip-hop music probably after high school, and he was really, really good at it. And he was never happier than when he was performing or recording or, somehow involved in that. And he performed up and down Southern California. He was really good. And his friends and our family would sometimes say, "Hey, Joel, why don't you just riff on diapers?" And he would just go off for like 3 minutes, nonstop, just like on it. He was really, really, really good. And it was something that he loved. This was about the time that he moved on to meth. And he did a lot of meth. And he explained to me one time, he said, "Mom, when I do meth, I can do anything. I'm invincible." How do you fight with something like that? So I married the kid's stepdad. This is Tony. This is my Tony. This is Tony in the back as well. And he stepped into a mess. I mean, he stepped into a whirlwind and became a great dad to my kids. And he and Joel eventually became pretty close. This was another family trip to Vegas. This kind of redeemed some of the drama that went on in Kauai. And so all 4 of my kids, including Emmy, my bonus daughter. So along with meth and heroin comes jail, terms, stints in jail. He went to jail a number of times. And he would then go to rehab. So come out of jail, go to rehab. Come out of jail, go to rehab. And usually when you come out of jail, you are required by probation to get a job and do certain other things, show up and pee in a cup and all that kind of stuff. So he would just have one minimum wage job after another. It's pretty hard to get ahead, to make restitution, to get an apartment, to begin to do all those normal things that we say you should do when you're making minimum wage. But we always supported him. We were happy he was sober. We didn't care if he was washing dishes, pumping gas, whatever, as long as he was sober. And so we supported everything that he did in that. But it does make it really hard. The last time Joel went to jail, though, it was a very serious charge, and he had a 5-year ticket. And he got released after only 3 years on an assembly bill in California. I'm from California, by the way. That released nonviolent drug offenders early. As part of that release, he went through a program called Lighthouse. It was rehab probably number 6 or 7, and it was the most effective rehab I had ever seen. Heartbreakingly, this program was not open to anybody that was not coming out of jail or prison at the time. But it was a holistic program. It treated him emotionally. It treated him physically. He had his first physical as an adult while he was at Lighthouse, and that was when we discovered that he had a heart condition that we didn't know existed. Whether it was caused by his drugs or exacerbated, we don't know. He got job training. He got life skills training. He learned how to make a budget, how to pay a bill, how to rent an apartment, all of those things that kind of go by the wayside when you've entered the kind of life that he entered. It was the best program ever, and as a result of it, he learned the roofing trade. He joined the Roofers Union in San Diego and began working. This is him on top of a high-rise in San Diego, and he said, "Mom, I have a job. I have a life. I have a future. I have health insurance. I'm paying into a pension." He goes, "I'm a real boy now." So he proposed to his longtime girlfriend, Corey. She was also a recovering heroin addict. And he became bonus dad to her little girl, Jalen. And life was looking pretty good. And then they gave me my wish in 2015 for my birthday. We had relocated to Northern California. Joel came up and joined us, and I had all of my kids and our first granddaughter all together. And this was us in a picture in Napa. Now, there's another shameful little secret that families like to circle the wagons about, and that is that it's very common to have more than one family member struggling with substance use disorder. And as unfair as that might seem, and believe me, I have screamed ad nauseum into the void that this is not fair. It's true, unfortunately. So despite our painful education into all the misinformation around substance use, courtesy of Joel's journey, it took me a long time to realize that I was making some of the same painful assumptions about addiction when it came to having two kids with the same diagnosis. I mean, what if I told people that I had two, right? I mean, maybe they would believe that Joel was afflicted with the disease of addiction, but two kids? Come on, really? Then it must be something wrong with me, with the way I was raising them, something in our family, right? It had to be something to do with me. So let me tell you about kid number 2. So Becca and Joel were very, very close. We used to say they were twins, separated by 4 years. And she moved up to be close to us in Northern California. I should take that back and say, no, I went down and dragged her butt up to Northern California when I realized that things were getting a little bit out of control. But she became a part of our life up in Northern California. And it was because she was very functional. She had a job. She had an apartment. She had a car. She knew how to pay bills. It was kind of easy to excuse what she was doing because she was functioning, right? And that was a good story right up until she ended up in the hospital with severe DTs from her alcoholism. And we had to admit that maybe things were not okay after all. So from being in the hospital, she entered her first rehab for alcohol. It was a co-ed rehab. I do not recommend, by the way, but it was a co-ed rehab. And then she went into a co-ed sober living environment where she met a young man who turned her on to heroin. She never used heroin other than her brother, had never been exposed to it, but nevertheless, here she is. She likes to say, I went into rehab for alcohol and came out addicted to heroin, so not so funny. But this picture up at the top left was a reunion, and it was not a happy reunion, but at the time that this picture was taken, there she is with Hallie, so you can see the difference in age between Hallie and the last picture that you saw of her. Most of our family had not seen Becca in almost 2 years when we all got together for this. But it was Thanksgiving, November 2017, And we had had Thanksgiving dinner. Steve and Emmy and Hallie were there. We had an assortment of friends and so forth. We didn't have Joel and Becca. They were estranged from us at that time. Joel had relapsed. He and Corey had broken up. He was pretty much living on the streets by then. My last text that I exchanged with Joel was on Thanksgiving night. And my tradition, I guess you would say, is that Thanksgiving weekend I decorate the house for Christmas, right? Anybody else here do that? Yeah, I'm an old Southern girl, it kind of dies hard. So I decorate the inside of the house, I decorate the outside of the house. That's not my house, but I decorate the inside, I decorate the outside. I mean, to the point where it pretty much looks like Macy's threw up in my living room, right? So that's what I do. So we had the house all decorated. Monday night, we're sitting there, the fireplace is going, admiring the fruits of my labor, and the phone rings, and it's Becca. Well, Becca doesn't call, Becca texts, so that's alarm bell number one. And I pick up the phone, she's crying, and she says, Mom, Joel's gone. I had been waiting for that phone call for almost 20 years. And you tell yourself you're ready for it, but you're not ready for that call. So I said, what do you mean he's gone? Did he run away? Where is he? And she says, Mom, he's gone. And it just hit like a pile of bricks. So we called my son over, my older son over. He lives not far from us, and he came over, and we all cried together and then started making a plan. And Tony and I get in the car, and we begin this long night's drive to San Diego. And I don't know how I felt. I'm sure a psychiatrist could probably put a word to it. All I can say is that I was in shock. I was numb. I couldn't talk. I know that as we were driving down there, I was kneading my hands constantly, just couldn't talk. And so we drive into San Diego at dawn. This is my home city. This is the city I love, and it'll never be the same. And as we drove into town, I'm like, here's all the things we have to do. We have to call somebody, we have to make plans. We gotta, now my mind is racing. So we called Joel's friends, who called other friends, and somehow we get the word out. And we had a memorial service at the church that we used to go to when we lived there. And that's my son, Stephen, playing a song for his brother. And so many friends were there, and they were all so sad that he was gone. So sad at the loss, the uselessness, the ridiculousness of it. And so we had a memorial service at my brother's house that night, and after all was said and done, after everybody was gone, I was just standing in the yard. This picture is taken from their back patio. And I was like, what do I do now? What do I do how do I go on without one of my kids? And I think that the service was on Saturday, so it makes sense that we went home on Sunday, but I honestly don't know. Those days have just become a blur. We wanted Becca to come with us, but she wasn't ready to leave San Diego, so she stayed behind. And so the drive home was really, really heavy and really sad. And after Joel's death, all those stages of grief happened, and sometimes they all happened at once, and sometimes they were, it's not linear. Grief is not linear, believe me. And I was trying to figure out, what do I do with this? How do I make sense of this? How do I use this somehow to help other people? That whole call to service is really, really runs deep. So how do I do this? So I joined this, and I started doing that, and I got involved with these guys, and then I did this, and then there was that, and it was just very frenetic and very chaotic. And I finally, I think grief just broke me down, and I stopped. I just had to stop. And I thought, whatever I'm supposed to do will find me somehow. So while I was waiting, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. how do I be of use? And I started thinking, if love is not the answer, if my love couldn't save Joel and didn't stop Becca from spiraling down into the same thing that he was doing, because she had now started using herself, using the same drugs that her brother used, the same drugs that we sat and cried about together, the same things that she begged him to stop. She was doing all of the above, and then some. So in searching for something to do, some way to make sense, my husband and I discovered Partnership to End Addiction. And we started going through craft training. And through the things that we learned through craft, these are some of the basic principles, but through the things that we learned about craft, we became peer parent coaches. And that was meaningful to me. That was being able to help some other mom or dad that was like me, who was crying, what the hell did I do wrong? What is going on? How do I live with this? How do I stand up and live every day while my kids are out running the streets? And it's funny because the parents that I coach, I have only twice coached anybody with an adolescent. They're all adults. Their children are adults that are using. Still trying to find an answer, still trying to find some help. And I began to understand through learning about craft and studying it and working with other parents that Joel's behavior was not all that random and chaotic, and that a lot of what Becca was doing did make sense on some level. It made sense in some way. And so it didn't feel so out of control, I guess, and so like I was out of control. Now, craft is not a silver bullet. There is no silver bullet for any of this. But I learned it was my best chance at maintaining connection with her and maintaining an open communication with her. That's the best that we can do, is trying to maintain a loving, open relationship with them until they can get well. So that we can love them until they get well and communicate with them. And the other thing that I learned was that it was for me. Grief is very isolating. Having a loved one with substance use is very isolating because we all think we're the only one. Nobody else is going to understand. And when I coach a parent who says, oh my God, you totally get it, you're like, yeah, welcome to this club that none of us want to be in, right? But I did learn better ways of communicating. The way I communicated with Becca was completely different than the way I communicated with Joel. The way I felt about myself was very different with Becca's journey than it was with Joel's. And I'm happy to tell you my daughter will now be sober a year on November 16th. And I thank God every day that she did not suffer the same fate that her brother did, because it was a very real possibility. Now, was that because of me? Was that because of craft? Probably not. But all I know is that our conversations were much deeper and more healing than they were with Joel. So the more I learned, and I realize I'm running out of time, but there was a session in here after me that got canceled. So I've got a little bit of extra time if y'all want to hang out. So the more that I learned about substance use disorder, the more my social advocacy background began to kick in. And I started thinking, oh, if love is not the answer, then what is? So what do we do to address this scourge of addiction and not just sit and cry and wring our hands and fight over legislation? Because believe me, I am at the Capitol more times than I can count, fighting about something that this party wants and that one doesn't, and so forth. And every time I stand up and say I'm a mom with lived experience, that changes the conversation. But what I envision is truly a community of healing instead. So a community that is organized around the idea that substance use disorder is as regular and is as prevalent and is as likely to occur as cancer, diabetes, hypertension, any of those other diseases that we won't call a disease. So if that's true, what if we were to have recovery-oriented systems of care? What if we had communities oriented around these systems of care? What if we started with children as young as 5, explaining to them in their terms, in words that they can understand, what addiction means and what it looks like? Because I can guarantee you it's happening in their homes, it's happening in their neighborhoods, it's happening somewhere. They understand far more than we think they do. So once we understand what might be going on and what they can receive, then we begin to impart a little bit more, not some already predetermined program like don't, just say no or dare. Those worked out really well, didn't they? What if once you realized you needed something, what if it was as easy as walking into your neighborhood clinic or talking to a community doctor? Instead of like what I watched my kids do, I watched my kids what we called dialing for beds. Do you have an open bed? Nope, call back tomorrow. Do you have an open bed? Nope, call back tomorrow. Tomorrow may not ever come. When that window opens, they need to be able to walk through it right then. Or come in high, come in sober. For this program, you got to come in high because we require that you go through detox all the way to the end. Oh, but no, this one, you got to go detox and then come over here. Everything is a barrier to getting well. That's what we can't have. What if when you do encounter the criminal justice system, because you do encounter the criminal justice system, what if it was creative? What if it was designed to restore rather than punish? What if it was more applicable to the crime instead of locking people up for something that doesn't even equate to what it was that they did? What if a mama who realizes that she needs help isn't afraid to reach out because they'll take my kids away? When you decide you want to go into recovery, what if you got to go to a place that looked like this? Free. Instead of one of those houses that's on the back alley somewhere, not in our neighborhood, and furnished with cast-offs that the Goodwill wouldn't even take. This is Isaiah House in Kentucky. This is where my daughter went. I've never seen a system that bestowed so much dignity and love on people. What if right inside your communities you had drop-in centers, you had coffee houses like this Recovery Cafe in San Jose, California, where you could go in, you can get a cup of coffee, you can talk to somebody about how do I get a social security card, you can say, how do I deal with this aspect of my sentence that's coming up, you can have a warm meal, you can talk to people that are just there just to be with you. Take recovery classes, attend a 12-step meeting, whatever your flavor is. What if that was right there in the neighborhood? What if you actually got job training that was meaningful? Not just get out of here, you're out of jail, go find a job because you got to satisfy probation, but what if we helped you stop that revolving cycle? Why would you work a minimum wage job that you can never dig yourself out of the debt that you owe to society when you could make 4 times as much selling drugs? Why? What if there were more recovery-friendly workplaces like EAT in Las Vegas that not only hires felons or people with substance use backgrounds, but they actually recruit for them and give them a second chance? And then what if when you lost your battle, as we did, if your loved one loses that battle, what if there was specific grief coaching that went along with that? Because the grief is not the same. It is shrouded in stigma and shame, and that person is already beating themselves up for the fact that they lost their loved one. I call this truly a system of care, a community-based system of care, something that is literally cradle to grave. Because this is the answer to the very real barriers to recovery that we all know exist. This is what would stop could stop that cycle. We can't jail ourselves out of this, right? We can't legislate our way out of this. But what we can do is provide as many opportunities as possible. These are very real situations. This is the hope that I have, though, for change. This is what I advocate for in the organizations that I work with. In addition to partnership, I work with our local SACARA group. I work with Recovery Advocacy Project. This is what I tell people is needed all the time. When I go to Sacramento and I speak, this is what I say. What are you going to do about any one of these points that there's a hole? What are we going to do about them? This is the answer. So finally, this is me. This is all my contact stuff. I invite you to come along with me. I mean, follow my website, follow my blog. These are the things that I advocate for. I'm happy to talk to anybody at any time, anything that you would like to just, shoot the bull with. Excuse me, I just remembered I'm on stream. Anything you want to talk about, what your experiences are. I am so grateful that I learned some of what I did along the way. We lost Jolie, but Becca is safe. And I pray that wherever you are on this same continuum, that you find your tribe, you find your support, you find your group that can help you, because that's what we all need. We're all in this together, right? Thank you.